Welcome back to another episode of the BookTribe podcast, where we ask authors and people who help authors for their insights, tips, and advice on every important stage of an author's writing and publishing journey. Today, I am joined by Stacy, a seasoned author, freelance editor, and the founder of Shortcuts for Writers. She helps authors to simplify writing and editing and make time for their goals while developing a positive mindset. Welcome, Stacey. It's lovely to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited to kind of get into it a bit more about the writing process and what your advice and guidance is to authors on that piece of their journey. But to begin with, we have the quickfire questions that we're asking every guest on the podcast. And these are just some bookish questions just to get to know you. There are no wrong answers, okay?
Okay.
So the first one is, when you read, do you use bookmarks or do you dog-ear your pages?
Bookmarks. I can't dog-ear the page.
No.
I've been known to use scraps of paper or any.
That is better than damaging the book. My friends do it, and I'm like, what are you doing? No, don't do that. Anyway, moving on. So what would you say is your kind of literary guilty pleasure? Is it a book? Is it a particular genre? What's your guilty pleasure?
I love reading like suspense novels and thrillers. I've been reading a lot of Riley Sager lately. Those are really, the kind of page turners that you keep reading one more chapter at like 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, or 3 a.m. in the morning. Yeah. And are you a night reader or an early morning reader?
A night reader.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm an early morning reader because I've got such a strong body clock. It gets to 10 o'clock and I'm like, oh. But yeah, well, thank you. Very quick few bookish questions, and we've got to know you a little bit more, so thank you. But one more question I have for you, which isn't a quick fire question. It's wanting to learn a little bit more actually about what got you into fiction writing, because you're yourself an author. What was it that got you into this?
Oh, I've been writing fiction since I was in third grade. I just loved to read like my whole life. And I was very quiet and introverted. So reading was just my escape. And then I just wrote my first story in third grade. And then by fifth grade, I had a teacher who was very into creative writing, and he was always giving us these fiction writing assignments. And then it just caught his attention, and he really encouraged me. I think, just seeing this quiet girl writing these like mysteries, and the assignment would be like a 1 page, and I'd turn in like a 10-page story, and I just kept writing all the way up. And I had I wrote my first novel when I was in high school and entered it in a competition, and then it won. So I had my first young adult novel published when I was 18.
Wow.
So I've just been writing fiction ever since.
And what is it that kind of made you turn to kind of providing support and guidance for other authors? What was that moment, that life circumstance that made you kind of make this shift?
Well, I was a journalist for a daily newspaper for several years, and then I did like PR marketing writing for a company. And then when I had kids, I did some like freelance writing on the side, like for just local clients, magazines. And one of my long-term clients decided they weren't going to have a newsletter anymore. So I had a big opening in my schedule. So I decided to market myself like as a freelance editor. And I started with very low prices, just getting into it to get experience, to see if I liked it. And I enjoyed working with authors. So as I got more experience, this was about 10 years ago. So as I just got more experience and work with authors in different genres, I saw that they were all making the same mistakes. Like when I was writing an editorial letter to them, I'd be kind of, even though it was a very individual editorial letter, like I tend to write like 10 single spaced letters. So, and I would be copying and pasting just some of the general feedback into it, like about show, don't tell, and passive writing and overused words. They would just making the same mistakes over and over, and they were mistakes I had made also, because I've received a lot of feedback over the years from agents and editors myself. It's it's just, you don't know how to write a book. Just writing a book isn't something that comes naturally. You can get the story down, but to make it publishable, you need some training to do that. And being an editor allowed me to see where people needed this training and what the gaps in their knowledge were. And sometimes if you read a book about writing, you see all these tips like write actively, or show don't tell, but it's hard to know what that means unless someone points it out to you. And unfortunately, the editing process can be really expensive, and most authors need multiple rounds of editing. Like, a common misconception is, oh, okay, I finished my drafts, I've done as much as I can, I'm going to hire an editor now, and then I'll be ready to proofread it and either self-publish it or send it off to a agent or query letters. And they don't realize that this is just the beginning, that they're probably going to need multiple rounds of editing, 5, 6, 7 rounds of editing. And most authors are doing this on the side, or it's like a passion project, a dream, and they can't afford to spend $1,000 per round of editing for every rewrite they do. So that's where I realized I could just fill this gap by creating some courses on editing and different topics where I saw authors needed help, to kind of help them to get a better handle on the craft of writing, and to get practice, and to start being able to pick up on some of these issues themselves, so that they would be less dependent on hiring editors for 7 rounds of editing.
And I guess as well, we're seeing a lot of, as well, a lot more kind of writers coming onto the scene and wanting to self-publish. And maybe that's an effect of COVID and everyone being locked up at home, I'm not sure. But, the self-publishing industry is looking to be, to grow even more than the traditional publishing industry, and already contributes to 30% of all books sold a year. So it's a huge industry, and as you say, a lot of those self-published authors might not be able to afford those rounds. And I think what's really great is also making these tips digestible, because as you said, you have these books and there's just so much out there in terms of how to write a book, and it's like, well, where do I even start with this? So actually, creating those tools that help to make that digestible, and to make it actionable and easy for someone to go, okay, right, I'm going to try that, and that should work, is really useful to them, I'm sure. But personally, from your own experience, what did you find the most difficult part about being a writer? Was it the things that you've mentioned, or was it something more specific?
I think for me, and for a lot of writers that I know and clients I've worked with, it's just putting your work out there for judgment, and just waiting to hear whether you're in a critique group. It's nerve-wracking to see what their feedback's going to be, or if you hired an editor and you're just waiting for them to read it and what their feedback's going to be. And then even when it's published, the reviews, it's going to be nerve-wracking. Like, you see you have a new review on Amazon, and you're like crossing fingers, like hoping it's going to be somebody that resonated with. And it's just, it can be hard you really have to develop a thick skin. And then when I started out, there was a lot less opportunities with self-publishing. It was really the only option was traditional publishing, and there were some people that self-published, but you'd have to order like a ton of copies and carry them around in your trunk at bookstores. It wasn't like with ebooks the way it is today, so there's a lot more opportunity for authors. So it back then there just wasn't a lot of just ways to get feedback, and so it was a lot of rejection, submitting to agents and publishers and getting form letters, or near misses with publishers, and telling you like all the issues, like we like it, but it's not we're not passionate enough about it to represent it, or we're not going in this direction. But so it's just a lot of rejection, um, which can be difficult just not to internalize it and to have that confidence keep going. You really have to develop a thick skin and be able to distance yourself from it. And now with so many people being able to self-publish and just put their books out there, now it's not just getting letters, nicely worded letters from publishing companies. It's just Amazon customers or Barnes and Noble customers, and you don't know what they can give you a 1-star review or a 2-star review, and it's just putting that something you worked on so hard and it's such a personal project out into the world and wondering what people are going to think about it. And you just have to really develop that mindset that even the most best-selling books, the most by the popular authors, if you read the reviews, are going to have some negative reviews also, and you can't please everyone, so you just have to be willing to accept that, but that's easier said than done.
Yeah, so in terms of mindset, are there any kind of recommendations as to support that authors can tap into? Are there kind of groups or communities that authors can tap into to find that kind of support? Because I suppose it's more of a well-being, mental health challenge just as much as it is a getting into the creative process challenge there, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think on one part of it is to just surround yourself with other writers. If you don't have a local writers group, then to find like a forum or a group online, or if you write in a certain genre, maybe you want to join like Sisters in Crime, like if you write mystery novels, or the Society of Children Book Writers, if you write children's or young adult books. And a lot of those have regional chapters, but that's what I did when I was starting out, because there wasn't such a so many online communities. This was like before the internet. So but now, if you don't want to do that, or if there's nothing like in your area, there's just Facebook groups. There's just so many different options. I think it's important to just join these groups and talk to other writers and try to make some friends so that you can, because you'll see people posting about these things, and it just helps you to realize it's not you. This is just what the business is, and it just helps to be around like-minded people who have the
Yeah.
same goals and are going through the same ups and downs. And then I think you do have to work on your mindset and your imposter syndrome, and there's different strategies
Yeah.
for that, like just trying to realize what your limiting beliefs are and working on them, and different things help for different people. Sometimes there's podcasts you can listen to on those topics, or reading books about them. There's I like EFT tapping is something I've done. There's meditations you can listen to about confidence and that kind of thing. And I think you just have to find what works for you and do it, because you have to have that confidence and that thick skin, or else it's very easy to get discouraged, or ask yourself, why am I doing this again?
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. And actually, the sentiment that surrounding yourself with people in the same position as you, or doing similar things to you, will probably give you that sense of I'm not alone in this, which is quite, as you say, with the imposter syndrome, it won't help. I wanted to go back to some of those mistakes that you mentioned earlier. So what mistakes do you find authors do, or kind of happen the most in the writing process? I know that you mentioned a few, maybe it's worth repeating them, but are there any more that are common?
I think like a lack of story development, where a lack of character arc, like we don't know why these characters are making the decisions they're making, or pacing issues, so that the story isn't really increasing. Like a lot of times, some manuscripts I've read that really, as like the story goes on and as we're getting into that last act, there should really be obstacles and things at stake, and a climax. And a lot of times there really isn't. It's more like episodic, and it's not building in momentum and conflict and obstacles. So I think that's the big thing, is figuring out what your plot points are and why your character is making these decisions. And then the other big thing I see is just the point of view issues where we don't get into the narrator's head enough. So especially in dialogue scenes, I'll see like pages and pages of dialogue, but very little of it filtered through a viewpoint character's eyes. Like we can almost don't even realize who's whose viewpoint we're in, like who's telling us the scene. And we really need to get into that character's head and really be in that character's head throughout the whole scene, so that we understand like why this character is making these decisions. Like what is character thinking and feeling, and why is he reacting that way? And sometimes authors just get carried away by the dialogue or and they just, or description and pages and pages of description, and they just lose track of who's telling the story. So everything really has to be filtered through that character's eyes. And there might be multiple narrators in the story, but whatever scene we're in, it really needs to be filtered through someone's eyes and not just pages and pages of dialogue, because then the readers aren't getting invested with these characters in the story. So I think it's fleshing out and developing their ideas, and it's not something we're taught to do like in school. Like we read books, we don't write. We're not taught how to write a novel. It's just something that it's a skill that you have to learn and develop and get practice with.
So if perhaps if we broke this down into 3 categories, what would you say characterizes a great book, a good book, and a bad book? If maybe it's like a couple of things for each of those 3 categories, how would you split them up?
I think a great book just makes you feel emotion and you want to reread it. You just keep thinking about it afterwards. And it's kind of in the eyes of whoever's reading it. Like a great thriller is different than a great literary fiction novel. But so there isn't like one great book. But I think a great book to the audience of that category, it just really makes you feel things. And it's just you're thinking about it like a couple weeks later. A good book, I think it's something you don't want to put it down. It's well developed. It makes sense. It might be like a beach read. It keeps you entertained, or just you enjoyed reading it, but you're not necessarily going to remember the character's name like a month later. You remember you read it and it was good, and you might recommend it to someone else, but you're not going to remember. It just doesn't have that lasting impact that you're going to remember all those little details. And I think a bad book is one that where the author has jumped into publishing it, and it's just not a developed story. It's poorly edited. I think like some people might classify like a best-selling book that they read that they got at Barnes and Noble as a bad book. I wouldn't necessarily say that. I think it just might not appeal to everyone's taste. It's still well written, and it could have some flaws in it, but that doesn't make it bad. It might not be, it might not be like, it might be a 3-star book as opposed to a 5-star book. But I think what I see is like the I don't want to say bad books, but like the ones that really aren't publishable, but they have been published, where they usually haven't had a lot of editing. I know some self-published authors have didn't realize they needed a developmental editor, and they've hired a copy editor, so it might have all the commas in the right place, but the story itself really isn't publishable. It's not developed. It breaks a lot of the show don't tell, and there's overused words and passive writing, and so I think that's authors really need to not underestimate the importance of editing. I think just so many beginner writers think it's easier than it is, and they don't realize that it really, you have to work hard to make it publishable and to make it a really strong book.
There are a couple of things that really came out of that for me, which was firstly the emotion that is kind of influencing the reception of a book. And as you say, I've read books across kind of different, specifically romance genres, and what is a great book in, say, the sci-fi romance is different to what is a great book in the fantasy romance. So I get that it is kind of an emotional response, and a good book is a good book. There's nothing particularly wrong with it, and it was enjoyable. But I also think for authors, that's a great value lesson in the sense that you're writing for your audience. If someone says they don't like it and it's because they're reading out of their genre, then it's because they're reading outside of their genre. It might not be their thing. And also, this need for authors to really consider the editing kind of that they need, as you say, with the developmental editing, and that being a necessary step if they can afford it. If not, then it's a kind of a toss up, really, a trade off with, do you want it to be a good book, and to ensure that it's a good book, then go through that process and invest that money and time into that piece of the process. So I think that was really valuable. And what would your advice be then to an author who is perhaps at the beginning, they've just thought about a plot or had some inspiration, and they're just about to go on that writing process? What would your advice be as to the first steps in their creative journey?
I think read in the genre that make sure you're reading a lot in the genre that you're writing, so that you can pay attention to things. Like, I think you need to know what to pay attention to, like what makes you really identify with that character, or what makes, if there's villains in it, what makes you dislike that villain, or what keeps you reading. Like, why are you, how did that chapter end that makes you at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning that you have to read the next chapter. So what is it that's grabbing you? What are the strengths? Are there any weaknesses that you're seeing? Or look at the dialogue scenes. What else is on the page besides the dialogue? Yeah. Pay attention to, like, how often we're getting into the narrator's head, or how much description is there, and what words are they using. I think you just, so many writers don't know. They read a lot, they love to read, but they're not looking at it. They're looking at it as a reader. They're not looking at it analytically. And so then when they turn in a manuscript to be edited, and their manuscript is lacking these things, it's just this, because they're just not aware of it. They need to think be creative and as they're writing, and not edit themselves too much, but they also need to develop that editorial eye and need to think like an editor, or else they're going to have a ton of rewrites at the end. Unfortunately, they might write themselves into a hole and have to go back. And so while it's good to just write and get the story down and realize it doesn't have to be perfect as you're writing it, I think it's also important to start exposing yourself to how to write well, and learn these concepts, like the show don't tell, or the write actively, and then go to the books you're reading and look for examples of that, so that you can see it. Because a lot of times authors, they don't see it until an editor points it out to them, like, see how you're using, like, look and walk, how you're using these words on every page, or see how you got all this dialogue page it's all dialogue, there's nothing else on it. And do you see how we're losing track of the speakers, and we don't know why the protagonist said that, or how the protagonist feels about that. And then they realize it because an editor told them. But if they can learn to pick up on these things themselves, they're just going to be much better off and save themselves a lot of time and money and aggravation in the long run. And reading well-written books can really help with that. If you know what to look for, or if you realize, whoa, this author is really, really using vivid words for the descriptions. I don't see a lot of, maybe there's a was or were occasionally here, but it's really written actively. Oh, am I writing it that way. Let me look at my manuscript. So I think the keys are in the well-written books, but most beginner authors don't know how to read them analytically. They just don't know what to look for.
So is there validity, do you think, in authors that are perhaps unpracticed in that editorial analytical way to then perhaps do some beta editing or to get some kind of first-hand practical experience of editing someone else's work to then notice the difference for themselves?
I think it can help to like joining critique groups or having a critique partner. Like I've had like lots of critique partners over the years, and it is easier to pick up on things in someone else's manuscript because you're not as emotionally invested in it, and you can see it more objectively. So I think if you can find even just one critique partner that you exchange with, someone that you hit it off with, first of all, it's really helpful to have, again, as we were saying before, it's helpful to have a friend who understands why you're doing this, because most people in your life are like, well, why is this so important to you? They have to go write up about these made up people, and you're spending so much time in your office, like, or spending so much time, on a computer or just in a coffee shop, like writing about these made up things. Like a lot of people aren't going to get that, and it's really helpful having even a couple of friends that get it. And if you can critique each other's work, and you have to be careful with critique partners too, because you need to find someone that it's encouraging also, because that's honest and points out things, but not in a way that's going to crush you and this is terrible. You have to. It's important to find the right people, and if you don't find the right people, then keep looking. They're out there, but it definitely can help you to just see these examples and pick up on something in someone else's manuscript, and then that makes you more aware of it for your own. Because we're so close to our own manuscripts, it can be hard to just look at it objectively, or you can just be so overwhelmed because you feel like there's so many things you have to fix, and you don't know what to start with first, and it's hard to see it. But once you do learn how to see it, then it gets much easier. Because then every book you write, you'll start catching yourself, and
Yeah,
realizing.
practice makes perfect, or close enough to it anyway.
Right.
In terms of tools, because obviously there's so many tools that authors can use for all different pieces of their kind of authoring. For the writing or creative process, what tools would you recommend they use? Are there useful pieces of technology that help them in that journey, or I don't know? What do you think?
I mean, there's all kinds of tools out there, that software and everything that can help you to outline your stories and that kind of thing. I'm more old school, like we're just just a paper and a pen, and then Word or Google Docs. But I think one that I do recommend a lot to my clients is Pro Writing Aid. It's a grammar and style and software checker. I think that's really beneficial because so many authors also, again, high school English class was probably a long time ago for some people, and it might not have been your strongest suit to begin with, and so it's hard to know like the mechanics of like writing dialogue, where the quote marks go and the commas, and I see some manuscripts that are just riddled with errors, and I'm not a copy editor. I help with the developmental and the line editing, and I'll tell them if they have an issue with copy editing. I'll give them some pointers on, but I'm not the person you would hire to like fix every comma.
Yeah.
And a lot of authors will need to hire a copy editor, or proofreader, even just to submit it to agents, even if they're not self-publishing. It's just because there's so many errors in it, and a tool like Pro Writing Aid can help you cut down on those. I mean, it doesn't catch everything. It's not like a magic formula, but it does. It will catch a lot and make it more professional. And then then you start to learn, like, oh, this is where you put a comma like before the and. Oh, I have to pay more attention to that, and it just helps you to learn more about the mechanics of grammar and that kind of thing. You may still need to hire someone depending on what your skill level was to begin with, but it'll cut down on a lot of it. And if you're paying a copy editor like by the hour or something, again, the more you can catch on your own, the more money it will save you. So that's a good one. And there's free versions too. Grammarly is another one, and that has a free version. So definitely run your manuscript through spell check, and once in a while as you're working on it, clean it up and run it through these free checkers. And you may want to invest in a paid one also.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. As you said, if they can trim down the time and the money that it costs to go through these processes, then absolutely do it. Now, we've also mentioned that, a lot of writers probably have full-time jobs or have other responsibilities like kids or, whatever, that means that writing is probably an activity that they have to fit around those things. How might you suggest or advise that they balance the writing with kind of their lifestyle?
I think just realizing that it's better to write 10 minutes a day than to write every 2 weeks for an hour or two, because all that at least keeps you in that mindset of your book, and you don't have to keep refreshing your memory about where you are and spend half your time doing that. Even writing 10 minutes a day can really make progress by the end of the week. I used to write on my lunch breaks for 10 minutes. When my kids were at karate, I would take a laptop with me and write for a little while. Just try to fit it in as you can, and just realize that the small pockets of time are important. And if you keep waiting for those days when you can write all day, they might never come, and you'll just get a lot more done if you work on during those small pockets of time. And then if you get a day that you can work for several hours, great. But many of us aren't going to get those days very often, and you're not going to get a book done just waiting for those ideal writing days. You just have to write even when you don't feel like it for 10 minutes. It could be in the first thing in the morning or before you go to bed. Just find the times when you're most productive and look on your calendar. It can be helpful to write it out on your calendar when you see where you might have some of these pockets of time, or you're like, oh, it's Thursday, I might actually have 45 minutes before I have to be at my next thing. So just kind of put it on your calendar so it's like a date with yourself, so that at least you can try to take advantage of those days when you have more time.
Sure, and I know that there are a lot of opportunities online to join like virtual writing groups, and I know that for the BookTribe we run silent reading writing parties, so that there's 2 hours that anyone can dedicate to doing whatever they want to do in those 2 hours, but it gives an opportunity to book in time just to have those 2 hours or 1 hour, however long it is, to really focus on the writing and just shut everything else out for a while. I think that's perfect advice. I know I also had a university tutor who every morning she'd write for an hour before her day started. And that was her way of being productive and making sure that she was on top of her writing work as well. So yeah. And I was intrigued, actually, by a post that I saw on your feed, which was talking about the authentic representation of diverse characters. And that's something that I've been really interested in learning more about, especially. But how do you kind of suggest authors handle writing about characters that perhaps identify differently to themselves?
I think you really have to do your research and talk to people that can, like, sensitivity readers, people who just have the knowledge or who come from these different diverse backgrounds. For example, I have a friend, Sarah Elizabeth Sawyer, and she teaches a course on writing about Native Americans. So that even if you have a character that's a Native American, she can really tell you how to avoid stereotypes, and she has a course on it. And there's different, I know I've seen online like sensitivity readers in different categories. If you kind of Google whatever you're writing about and like add like sensitivity readers or something like that, you might be able to find people, or you're even asking around like people that that might be like from a certain culture, but I think it's really important because you want readers to trust you, and it's got to be authentic. And it sometimes just doing research on Google isn't enough, and you really need to either interview someone or have them just read those scenes. You might have to hire someone to read those scenes and give you their feedback. But it's definitely an area you don't want to underestimate. And even not just about diversity, but anything like I had a lawyer who wrote a guest blog post for me talking about the common mistakes she sees in legal scenes in books. And whatever you're writing about, I have a course called Perfect Your Plot where I talk about this a lot, how I see a lot of medical issues in manuscripts that just aren't believable, or or the author clearly didn't do their research. I even see this on TV shows sometimes too. I'm like, yeah, like, no, we've gone through that. That is not accurate. But as a writer, a newer writer, who's not established, you're not going to be able to get away with that. Readers are going to notice that and lose trust in you. So whatever you're writing about, you need to find experts and interview people. And I think that comes easily to me because I used to be a reporter. So I used to have to call people all the time to interview. So I've also done that for my fiction, like interviewing, going on ride-alongs with police, and brainstorming my story ideas with police, and interviewing like firearms people. So whatever you're writing about, you just need to do your research. And it is sensitive when you're writing about cultures or just diversity. You need diverse characters. You really need to, you can't just wing it. You got to find somebody that can help you to present it authentically.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, as you say, because I know that there's a lot of people who would feel perhaps nervous about, as you say, going into those interviews and doing that face-to-face stuff. But if there's a mechanism for them to perhaps just send work over to get feedback directly, then actually that is a much more comfortable process for them. And so, yeah, I think I was just really interested in that because it's something that you do tend to see, is that comments saying, this is just a stereotype, didn't enjoy it, that kind of thing. And so I think for a lot of authors who do want to be writing about diverse characters, or even, as you say, like cultures and professions, then there are mechanisms for them to kind of work through that. So yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So from today's discussion and this topic of kind of the writing process and tips for writers, if you could narrow it down to one thing, is there one piece of advice that you would give them?
I think you don't have to figure it out alone, and you shouldn't try to figure it out alone. Like find the right mentor that resonates with you. There's a ton of writing. I mean, I'm one of them, but there's tons of writing mentors out there. And I think find the ones that resonate with you. A lot of times, there's a lot of free writing summits and conferences. And if you're in these writing groups, like on Facebook, and if you're probably going to start hearing about all of these different resources, and just experiment and look in your genre or see what resources are available, and just find the people that resonate from you and learn from them, because it's overwhelming. There's so many resources out there. There's so many books out there. There's so many courses, and you can't learn everything. And so you need to kind of hone in on what you need right now, and you can learn more later. But what do you need right now to get this book done? And then what do you need to get this book edited? And then what do you need to know in order to market it and promote it? And so there's just different stages. And don't think about down the line. If you're just writing your first book, don't worry about taking courses right now on Amazon ads, because what you need to focus on is writing a strong book, because so many authors, I mean, most of the books I edit just need a great deal of editing. And it's very hard to write a perfect first draft. I don't know. I don't think I've ever met an author, including myself, that can write a perfect first draft. It just takes a lot of rewriting, and but you have to know what to look for, and you can learn that from if you just find those handful of mentors that that you resonate with, and just focus on that rather than trying to look at the whole everything out there, because then it's overwhelming.
So then let's talk about quickly you and the work that you do. What are some of the kind of entry level programs and courses that you're offering authors?
So I have a variety. My sort of flagship signature course is my book editing blueprint, which it's for authors who have a completed draft, but you can also take it if you're working on your draft, because it kind of help you to catch things and maybe keep you on course as you're writing. But that just takes you through all of the things that an editor would look at when they submitted their manuscript, from the big plot hole things to the small things like copy editing and line editing. And then I have some smaller courses, like a $9 course on writing your book blurb, which I recommend that you do before you write your book, actually, or as you're writing it, because that can help keep you on course. A lot of times I'll see a completed manuscript and then they'll send me the blurb and they don't really go together. Like, the blurb isn't really what the story is about. And sometimes that means it's an issue with the blurb. Sometimes it means it's an issue with the story where it's too unfocused. So that can really help you stay on track. Then I have courses on like body language for how to enrich your characters through nonverbal communication and body language, and how to avoid plot holes. And then I have a time management course for writers on how to fit it into your life, and how to sort of a holistic course on how to have like work-life balance as a writer so that you can fit it in but along with everything else. And then I had some courses, a couple of courses on oracle cards for writers, like how to use them for brainstorming and to overcome limiting beliefs. So yeah, so I've just kind of used what's helped me over the years, different strategies and what I've learned as a writer and as an editor from working with so many authors, and put them into the bite-sized courses, things that I wish I had known about when I started, things that would have made it easier for me.
Amazing. So, if anyone would like to get in contact with you, how do they do that?
They could visit my website, shortcutsforwriters.com. And I have some free resources there also, including a free 5-day line editing class and a looks and gazes guide, because look is the number one overused word. That's another tip I can give you right now. Go do a search for look in your book. You might see it a lot more than you anticipated. So I have free resources like that. And I also have a Facebook group, the Shortcuts for Writers Editing Made Simple Facebook group, that they're welcome to join. So I'm always happy to hear from writers.
Yeah. So we'll make sure to include any links to your programs and to your website in the podcast description, as well as on the webpage. But Stacey, it's been absolutely wonderful talking to you. I've learned a lot, and I hope everyone else has as well. Stacey, it's been wonderful. Thank you so much for participating.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.